Did you see that? Let's go.
Tonight we're diving into something darker. A series of haunting tales that linger just beyond the light. From chilling figures that watch from the shadows, to ghosts that refuse to let go. Each one of our stories tonight is going to bring us closer to the edge of what we can't quite explain. In the quiet town of Santa Maria, the whisper of a tall figure known only as the Gray Man, watching silently from the shadows. Further out, on a stormy night, one glimpses something horrifying in her own reflection. Was it real, or just a trick of the light? And deep in the heart of an abandoned office, something sinister holds the keys to secrets best left untouched. Finally, in a small New Mexico town, a man spent his life chasing stories, only to become one himself. He lingers at the edge of every scene, a restless soul bound by the life that he can't let go. Each of these stories will take us deeper into a world where reason falters and reality blurs into shadows. So if you're ready, dim the lights, get comfortable, and join me as we step into the mysteries together. Welcome to Retraced Echoes. Tonight we're diving into a story that's haunted the quiet little town of Santa Maria, California since the 1980s. You see, it's the kind of tale that lingers, that makes you wonder if maybe there's something lurking just beyond your window. So if you're ready, settle in as we explore the story of the Gray Man. In the quiet rural stretches around Santa Maria, whispers began to spread in the mid-1980s. You see, locals, they talked of a figure, tall and shrouded, seen prowling the outskirts of town. They called him the Gray Man, a 7-foot figure with ash-gray hair and cold black eyes that seemed to watch from the shadows. People swapped stories about seeing him in the dead of night. It seemed his presence had a way of kind of sticking with you, like a bad memory that refused to fade. Then one night a call came into the local police. You see, it was from a terrified homeowner who whispered about a figure standing right outside his door. His voice shook as he described a man too tall, with strange silver hair and eyes that were, well, they were lifeless. As he tried to explain, the fear in his voice, it only grew, and then, as the dispatcher was giving him instructions, a loud, unnatural buzzing filled the line. The man's voice, it faded, drowned out by the noise, and then complete silence. The police rushed to his house, fearing the worst. When they arrived, the place was dark, an old house with peeling paint and a yard tangled in weeds. There was no sign of anyone outside, no evidence of a gray-haired figure that he had described. But as they stepped closer, they heard it. The muffled screams of the homeowner coming from just inside the door. They would announce themselves. They tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked, but it felt like something was holding it shut, like an invisible force pushing back.
I don't think it's locked.
They shoved and kicked, and finally, the door gave way. And that buzzing sound, the same sound that had cut off the call, was bursting through the silence, filling the house like a swarm of angry bees. Inside, they found blood painted across the floor and strange muddy footprints
Looks like a murder happened
leading to the staircase.
Follow my lead.
With their guns drawn, they followed the trail, their dread growing with each step. As they reached the landing,
It's leading
they
this
saw
way.
a trail of smeared blood leading to the closed door. Behind it, they could hear a man whispering, his voice muffled as if something or someone was covering his mouth. They forced the door open and found the man tied up, his skin pale, his body covered in cuts that traced around all of his vital organs, almost as if someone, well, they was mapping them out very carefully. He was babbling about the Gray Man who had come for him, his eyes wide with terror, barely able to form a coherent sentence. He swore that he had been calling for help for hours, but to the officers, it had only been about 30 minutes since the call. Now here's the thing. You see, the police, they found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no evidence that anyone had even been there. Just those muddy, bloody footprints that, well, they led nowhere. They stayed with him for hours trying to make sense of what happened, but his story was full of holes, of things that just didn't quite add up. See, he insisted that the gray man had been watching him for days and warned them that even after they've left, they'd feel the same presence too. Years later, the same man was found dead. We'll just say he unsubscribed himself from life. In the final note, he warned that they wouldn't leave him alone, and he cautioned the officers that had saved him, writing, "They're watching you too." And every so often, those officers say they feel something in the shadow of the darkest nights, a tall figure just beyond the light, like a faint memory, a warning. What do you think? Could there really be something, or perhaps someone, watching us from the shadows, following us even when we think that we're alone? Or was this maybe just the imagination of a man haunted by something that we'll never understand? Next, we're stepping into a story that brings chills every single time it's told. It's a haunting tale from a cold, rain-soaked night that left a very lasting mark on everyone involved. It's one of those stories that kind of makes you glance over your shoulder, that lingers in the back of your mind, especially when the weather turns dark and the shadows stretch just a little bit longer. So if you're ready, settle in as we explore the mystery of Inside Looking Out. It was a night where the shadows crept and silence weighed heavily as cold rain turned the streets into a murky river and gusts of wind rattled the window panes. That's when the call came in. An elderly woman, voice trembling, claiming that something unnatural had taken up residence in her house. She lived alone, she explained, but could hear footsteps pacing back and forth on the second floor. The dispatcher, they had gotten so used to her phone calls that they assumed it was just an overactive imagination. But they still sent a patrol car, just to check things out. As the officer drove through the storm, the woman's voice, it grew more frantic. She whispered that a man was in her backyard, staring at her through the sliding glass door. A figure in a heavy coat with a hood pulled low, his face hidden in the shadows, frozen. She could only watch as he stood there, unmoving, before he seemed to fade into the darkness. When the officers arrived, they found her. She was shaking, her eyes was wide with fear. She had talked about hearing the footsteps upstairs, which had only just stopped when she saw the man standing outside. One officer stayed with her while the other went to search the backyard for any signs of an intruder. But the muddy yard, it was completely disrupted. No footprints, no signs of anyone at all. Didn't add up. In that mud, there should have been something. The only thing that made sense was that this must have been just a trick of light. Maybe her imagination that was steered up by the storm. But as they stepped towards the sliding glass door, they froze. There on the floor, they saw it. A trail of muddy footprints coming in from outside, leading towards the stairs. The realization hit them. The woman hadn't seen a man standing in her backyard. She had seen his reflection. He had been inside, standing right behind her. The officers exchanged a look, then slowly drew their guns and moved up the stairs, their footsteps muffled by the eerie silence. At the top, they found themselves in front of an attic door, hearing soft, deliberate footsteps above. They climbed into the attic, flashlights scanning the darkness, but it was empty, just dust, boxes, shadows that seemed to stretch in every corner. But one officer, he noticed something unsettling. A line of muddy footprints starting at the top of the attic stairs, crossing the attic floor, and then disappearing straight into the wall, as if the man had simply walked out of existence. They told her to call if she ever heard anything again, and call she did. In the months that followed, she claimed that she heard footsteps pacing above her. Eventually, her family moved her into a new home, but strangely enough, the new people that moved in, they heard nothing unusual. The officers, however, they still remember that night vividly, a night where shadows felt like they were watching, and maybe, just maybe, they were. What do you think? Was it the storm playing tricks, or could there be something else? Something that slips between the shadows, only making itself known to those who sense it. Our next story takes us into the heart of something dark and twisted, buried within the silent halls of an old office building. It's the kind of place that feels off just as soon as you step inside. Doors that won't stay shut, and shadows that stretch in ways that they shouldn't. And what makes it even more strange is this particular haunting, it comes with a key. So if you're ready, let's step into the mystery of the key holder. It was a quiet night when the two officers received a call about a triggered alarm in an old office building on the rough side of town. It was a weathered structure with more history than anyone knew, and it was now a collection of small offices and a pharmacy. Nothing about it seemed very ominous. Well, not until that night. The dispatcher told them that a key holder would meet them at the scene since they couldn't get into the building without him. So the officers waited in the cold, damp night air until a middle-aged man finally arrived. He looked a little bit rough around the edges, kind of weary, like he hadn't slept in days. Without a word, he led them into the darkened corridors. The building was pitch black, no windows in the hallways, and the lights,
dark in here.
They were all on timers. The officers had to rely on their flashlights, which only seemed to make the shadows feel even darker. They learned that the alarm had gone off upstairs in the office, a room locked behind a door that even the key holder didn't have access to. Frustrated, they turned back, retracing their steps, with the key holder shuffling silently behind. When they reached the elevator, it led them up to a floor where a single flickering light cast eerie shadows down the hallway. At the end of the corridor, they noticed something strange. One office door slightly ajar, with its handle trembling as if it was recently disturbed. Curious but cautious, they called out. Only silence answered. Silence that felt unnaturally heavy. As they opened the door fully, they stepped into the reception area with examination rooms that were branching off into the darkness. The air, it was bitter cold, colder than it should have been, making both of the officers shiver. They began checking each room, their flashlights cutting through the shadows, but every room was empty, untouched, like no one had been inside for years. After completing their sweep, the officers decided that it had to be a false alarm, but as they turned to leave, they noticed something very odd. You see, every single door that they had closed was now open, swinging slightly as if something had just passed through. The silence, it was broken only by the faint creak echoing through the hall. One officer turned to his partner. His eyes were wide, and he whispered, "Did we close all those doors?" His partner nodded, her face pale, both of them holding their breath, listening to the silence pressing in around them. And then it happened. A loud crash from down the hall, followed by the strange hissing static that blasted through the radios, filling their ears with garbled sounds. It was as if the voices were speaking through the static, just out of reach, twisting and blending into the mess of noise. Startled, the officers hurried back into the hallway, each step echoing into the quiet that followed the static. Reaching the elevator, they punched the button, glancing over their shoulders, feeling like something unseen was watching from the shadows. When they reached the main floor, they looked around for the key holder, hoping to get some type of an answer for what might have happened, but he was gone. One officer radioed the dispatcher, asking her to send the key holder back inside, but the dispatcher replied, kind of puzzled, saying that the key holder was still en route and had not arrived yet. The officers would slowly look at each other, chill settling over them. They explained that they had just spent the last several minutes with a man who had introduced himself as the key holder, who had let them in and stayed with them. The dispatcher, now clearly unsettled, insisted that no one should have been there and that the real key holder, a woman, was just pulling up to the building. A few moments later, the real key holder arrived, an elderly woman who looked visibly shaken as the officers described the man that they had seen. Her face, her expression, it was filled with fear as she explained that their description matched that of a doctor who used to work in one of those very offices. A doctor who had just taken his own life only a few days prior. Since his death, she explained, strange occurrences had plagued the building. Cold spots in the halls, alarms going off, doors that would open and close on their own. As she spoke, the officers couldn't shake the feeling that something in the building was listening, watching from the shadows. They decided then and there that they'd never come back. Since that night, whenever an alarm call comes in from that very building, they pass it off to officers who have not heard the tale of the key holder. So what do you think? Was it the restless spirit of a troubled doctor, or something even darker lurking in the quiet halls of the building? Our next story takes us to a small New Mexico town where a man who lived to tell stories became one himself. Known for his laughter and tricks, he was the town's heartbeat, always at the scene, always ready with a sly grin. But death has a strange way of twisting the familiar, and in Bob's case, it seemed it wasn't ready to let him go. Tonight we're stepping into the tale of a restless reporter. In a quiet New Mexico town, life moved at a very easy pace. See, the town had had its fair share of accidents and incidents, but no one was more eager to be there than Bob D., a local reporter with a knack for capturing every story, every scene. Bob was beloved by the town, a friend to the police force, known for his jokes, his pranks, even a quick flick of the ear if you weren't paying attention. He was part of the town's fabric, woven into the history with every story he told. But then, Bob lost his battle with lung cancer. His absence left a gaping hole in the community, a silence where his laughter once echoed. They buried him very quietly. His wife refused any kind of public memorial, preferring to instead just letting him rest in peace, away from the spotlight that he'd always loved. But rest, it was the last thing that Bob seemed willing to do. Not long after his burial, whispers began to spread. Officers at crime scenes, townsfolk, even regular passerbyers reported seeing him. Fleeting glimpse here, a familiar face scribbling notes in the crowd. Sometimes it was more than just a feeling. People swore that he was there, watching, recording, his face calm yet different. They saw Bob, but something about him had changed, something growing darker every time. The sheriff, a no-nonsense man, he dismissed it all as wishful thinking, just memories haunting those who missed him. But then came the night that changed everything. A night when proof knocked on his own door. The sheriff was at home when a loud, frantic knocking interrupted his quiet evening. It was his nephew, another officer, white as a sheet, shaking like he had seen something that he cannot explain. With him was his wife. Her face was also filled with fear. Sitting them down, the sheriff listened as they tried to make sense of what they had seen. Slowly, the story unfolded. They were sitting in their living room, watching television, when the nephew felt a sudden itch on his ear.
What was that?
At first, he just brushed it off, but then
Something flicked my
he
ear.
felt it again. A flick, sharp and unmistakable. He turned to his wife, about to speak, but froze. Standing in the doorway to their bedroom, watching them with a faint smile, was Bob. He lingered for a moment, his eyes fixed on them, before he turned and faded into the shadows of the hallway. The sheriff listened, his skepticism cracking. That night he decided to stay with them, hoping to see the ghost of Bob himself. And see Bob he did. It's a moment that he speaks very little about. He also doesn't admit that the very encounter had shaken him more than he would ever believe. From then on, it was as if Bob had made it his mission to remind the sheriff of his presence. The flicks on the ear became a regular occurrence, always when the sheriff was alone in dark rooms or when he least expected it. It was as if Bob was trying to say, "I'm still here. I'm not done yet." As time went on, people continued to see Bob, but now he looked different, tired, worn out, as if his spirit was being drained, pulled into something darker and deeper. Some say his face even began to look decayed, as though Bob's spirit was trapped, unable to let go, slowly decomposing even as he continues his rounds, bound to the life he left behind. And now, whenever an officer feels the itch on his ear, they know it's probably just good old Bob, still checking up on the stories he loved, making sure he's never forgotten. With every flick, every sighting, there's a lingering sense of sadness, a reminder of a spirit that couldn't quite find peace. So what do you think? Is it Bob's unfinished business that keeps him here? Or is it something more? And so we leave these tales behind. Or maybe they leave us. Stories like these remind us that sometimes the unknown is closer than we think, lurking just beyond what we can explain. Shadows that follow us, whispers that fade just when we try to listen. They make you wonder if something, or perhaps someone, is watching back. But what do you think? Are these just stories born from imagination, or could there be something more to the mysteries that we've shared tonight? I would love it if you'd tell me in the comments down below every theory, every thought. It adds another piece to the puzzle. And if you've enjoyed exploring the unknown with me, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. A big thank you for each one of you that tune in each week. Without you, my channel wouldn't have grown the way that it has over the last few months. We're almost at 10,000, so please be sure to tell your friends and family and those who like to hear about the stories of things that go bump in the night. It's your curiosity, your insights, and your support that makes this channel a place where we can uncover the strange and the unsettling together. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep an eye on the shadows. Sometimes they're closer than they seem. Until I see you in the next episode, goodbye.
Shadows twist and whispers call. Heart beats fast in that eerie hall. Tales say spirits come to roam, but duty pulls me from my home. Hands tremble, ghostly fog so thick. Laughter echoes, it feels sick. Doors creak open, lights flicker dim. Courage fighting though chance is slim. Stepping in to face the unknown, scared but brave on my own. Haunted whispers grip my mind. Fearless steps leave doubt behind. So spirits born, truth or tales out of scorn. Every echo chills my spine, but I know the task is mine. Haunting shadows, tricks of light. Will I conquer or take flight? What's beyond that next closed door? Only fear I must ignore. Stepping in to face the unknown, scared but brave on my own. Haunted